Good evening. As Michael said, I sold Blackwater, so I come here today not as a private military contractor. I run a logistics company. As I said in a recent interview, we deliver groceries from Cape Town all the way up through the DRC. We do a lot of aviation operations in East Africa. We're the biggest medevac provider for the UN, and we operate out of Malta as well with aircraft. So I am out of the PMC business. So I come here as someone who has built and operated a large company, operating in difficult places, as a businessman that understands costs and the kind of logistics it takes to really do that in difficult areas. So bear with me. We've had a very costly last 15 years in the West between Iraq and Afghanistan. We'll talk about the history of contractors, some modern warfare, small wars versus big wars, what was Blackwater, and then some private sector options going forward. Sorry it's so small, I thought there'd be a bigger screen. What it says, between the US and the UK, we've taken almost 7,000 killed in action and another 60,000 wounded since 9/11. What does that mean? $10 trillion in cumulative defense spending alone since then. And those costs are going to continue to rise. The U.S. did not experience peak healthcare spending on its veterans until the 1980s from World War II. So over the next 40 years, we can expect those costs to continue to go up. Despite all that spending, fleets are at the lowest readiness. The U.S. aircraft has something like 70% operational capability of its aircraft. All this third generation warfare, big war kind of stuff has been used and abused fighting insurgencies. And yet now, you have 12 nations at or near failing state status. Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Egypt and the Sinai, Libya, Nigeria, Somalia, Central African Republic, South Sudan, Mali, and Niger. Total population of those, 620 million people, over 8.5% of the world in a failing state. That is an enormous amount of human suffering. Almost all those cases comes from a major insecurity problem, an insurgency problem. As you look at the graph, it shows U.S. is 4% of the world population, 25% of the GDP, 36% of the defense spending, and 70% of the world's intelligence spending. Folks, it's not because we're not spending enough. So we go back in time. You think about how America was started. Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, Jamestown colonies. They were companies. They were companies listed on the London Stock Exchange. And they hired people, they hired contractors. They hired guys like John Smith or Miles Standish, who were not British soldiers. They were professional, they were mercenaries. John Smith actually worked for the Austrians against the Ottoman Empire. He was captured, enslaved, escaped slavery, made it back, signed on, came to Virginia. Became one of the, I believe, the first governor of Virginia. Miles Standish, similar background. Came on, protected the Massachusetts Bay colony. Now, you see that arm with the logo. That's from the original corporate logo from Miles Standish. And you see it reflected in still serving units of the U.S. Army. Because that militia that Miles Standish built to protect the colony became a Minuteman unit, became an Army unit of the U.S. Army, now still in the reserves. So direct lineage back. I tell you all this to dissuade you of the notion this idea of battlefield contractors is a new thing. We could go back even farther. We don't have enough time to even cover the British side of all this history, but at least from a Yankee perspective, this is where it started. Now, these guys, across the street from the White House, you have Lafayette Park. A statue of Lafayette, Rochambeau, von Steuben, Kosciuszko. Lafayette and Rochambeau, French officers, battlefield commanders for General Washington. Kosciuszko, the founder of American artillery. There's a huge statue of him at West Point, our Sandhurst. He was the guy that was key to the defenses at Saratoga, which was the first big victory that the U.S. had over the Brits, which convinced the French that these crazy patriots could win this war. And von Steuben, who was a Prussian, was the first Inspector General of the U.S. Army. He gave military training and discipline to the citizen soldiers who achieved the independence of the United States. At sea, The idea of privateer. 9 out of 10 ships taken by the Continental Navy, or by the Americans during the American Revolution, were taken by privateers. That is a private ship with a private crew and master given a hunting license. It's called a letter of marque and reprisal to go out and attack enemy ships. Now, they weren't going out and attacking warships. They were attacking British supply ships. But it was all about choking off the enemy's ability. And even our first responders. If you go to Alexandria, Virginia, parts of New York, certainly parts of Boston, you'll see a cast iron mark at a lot of houses. That is a fire mark. That means if you come to the States, you'll see a sign for Engine Company 5 or Ladder Company 3. It's because they used to actually be companies. It was an insurance cooperative that you paid into, and if you paid your dues, you got the mark. If you didn't have the mark, the fire brigade was not obligated to put the fire out on your house. American Civil War. Imagine you have a split capital, Washington, D.C. You have a huge Confederate counterintelligence threat. Who do they turn to? Alan Pinkerton, the original private eye, okay, to tamp down the counterintelligence and also to do security. Now, there's a picture you can't see very well there. That is Alan Pinkerton, Abe Lincoln, and General McClellan at the Battle of Antietam, one of the bloodiest wars of the Civil War. 26,000 men killed. In the bottom right, you can see after the war, in the 1890s, the Pinkerton force, okay, imagine as America is spreading west into truly the unsettled west. The U.S. Army wasn't there. It was Pinkerton, protecting rail cars, protecting settlements, protecting those lines of infrastructure. Private sector, not government. Advancing in history, we get to 1939. The Japanese are bombing the heck out of the Chinese. Chinese had no air force. They had no ability to defend themselves. Their chief of staff came to Washington and said, please, Roosevelt, help. Roosevelt wasn't in the war yet. The U.S. wasn't in the war yet at all. They allowed guys to take leave from the U.S. Army, Marine Corps, and Navy and go to work for Camco, for a private company in Shanghai called the Central Aircraft Manufacturing Company, and they became the Flying Tigers. They got some aircraft. Chanot paid them very well. Average Army Air Corps pay was around $260 a month. Chanot paid $600 to $750, and he paid another $500 for every enemy aircraft they killed. They racked up an incredible 10 to 1 kill ratio. And this is at a time they were flying a P-40. It was not a great aircraft. It was not a Spitfire. It was not a Mustang. This was the rest of the U.S. when they got in the war with the Japanese were really, it was 1-to-1. But they innovated with the right people, the right tactics, and the right motivation. And I love this quote from Sir Winston, and you know how the Brits love the RAF. He said, the victories of these Americans over the rice paddies of Burma are comparable in character with those won by the Royal Air Force over the hot fields of Kent at the Battle of Britain. Not bad for a bunch of contractors. So I keep that in there because of the issue of the flag. And you can see Britain going abroad, in America, in India. Now, I'm not here to debate the politics and the justifications of anything and everything the East India Company did. But the model of a private organization that goes and develops trade, that raises forces, in that case, 235,000 native forces, led by 14,000 expats, Presidency Army, that's kind of a repeatable, cost-effective model, much better than what we've done the last 15 years. Those are called the Presidency Armies. Now, the company overextended, they got abusive and corrupt and all kinds of problems, but building sustainable economies is what's necessary, especially as you look at those 8.5% of the world's population in a failing state where there are people dying of famine. Private organizations can develop the lines of trade in an economy to make it better. You look at the evolution of modern warfare. First generation warfare moved to the speed of a foot, maybe a horse, okay? But it's slow. It is, there's no electronic communication. Second generation, now you're industrialized war. It's the American Civil War, it's World War I, it's the Battle of the Somme, 60,000 Brits in one weekend, okay? Awful. Trench warfare, no maneuver. Third generation war, that is the Blitzkrieg into Poland, Hans Guderian, what the Germans did even into France. It is Gulf War I, and it's also what the U.S. and all of NATO prepared for and spent for 70 years to square off against the Soviet army. M1 Abrams tank, $9 to $12 billion aircraft carriers. Big, state-on-state, nuclear triad, the whole thing. But now, you're in fourth generation war, okay? It moves at the speed of the internet, okay? You're not even doing Mach 1 anymore. Now you're going at the speed of the internet. Now you can use Google Earth to plan your terror attack. It's hit and run guerrilla tactics. The enemy is easy to kill, but it's hard to find. And instead of a Soviet rifle regiment, 4,000 guys, tanks, everything else, now it's 2 bad guys in a pickup truck. The battles are fought at a squad and platoon level, okay? 8, 10, maybe 20 people, not 10,000. You must out-guerrilla the guerrilla. You need a cheap and a small footprint solution. The bottom right picture, it's a box cutter knife. It's the most cost-effective weapon system in history. And in the hands of 19 psychopaths, brought down the World Trade Centers, wrecked the Pentagon, and another aircraft into a field in Pennsylvania. Look at the damage, the economic damage, the damage in freedom it's caused to America and elsewhere in the West. And as we talked about, third generation war, that's what the entire military industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about built and trained for. It's what they still want to do. It's why they're still pushing F-35s and very high dollar aircraft and weapon systems. Now, and you still need that to fight or to deter from the big state-on-state combat. But when you look at that map, all the greens and all the reds, those are all insurgencies, and that's just since 1945. So this idea that war is the big one, yes, you have to prepare for that one. You want to deter from it. You have to have a strong enough military so that no one gets any ideas that it's a suitable course of action. But when you have that much insurgency, with that comes people being dislocated. It means they can't plant. They're refugees. They're preyed upon. There's just violence at a human level that is as staggering as a huge state-on-state war, but it's dispersed everywhere. And these are people that are not living well already, and now you're putting them even closer to the edge. You think about the return of surrogate or hybrid war. When the Russians rolled into Ukraine, they called them little green men. They weren't wearing Russian uniforms. They might have had Russian origin uniforms, but there was no patches, no insignia, and they took it down quickly. 500 troops, 3 IL-76s. That's a ramped cargo plane that carries around 70 tons. Okay, it's like a big old cargo plane. And 6 helicopters. They took down Crimea and the Donbass, and they're still there. And they got away with it. Syria and Afghanistan. The Iranians are masters at surrogate war, whether it's what they've done in Hezbollah, what they're doing in Yemen now, arming, training, supporting the Houthis to the point of them shooting ballistic missiles that even hit Riyadh a month ago. To the point that the Iranians now are even paying for Shia refugees, poor Shia people in Afghanistan, in Iraq. They're paying for them to immigrate to Europe as long as they sign over their sons for a 3 to 4 year military contract to have to fight for Iran as surrogates. So, like I said, we're spending a lot of money fighting a 4th generation war, okay? Guys with pickup trucks, with a 3rd generation military, with tanks, with nuclear powered aircraft carriers, all the rest. Kind of like mowing the lawn with a Porsche. You can do that, but it beats the heck out of your Porsche, and it's mighty expensive. And this rotation of a big conventional military, yes, we've been there for 15 years. No, actually, we've been there for 1 year 15 times. You rotate an entire army in, and they're there. When they leave, most of that area knowledge and experience leaves with them. And the U.S. military has never really adjusted to adapting to the insurgencies that they have on hand, and they keep the same professional education, the same rotation, everything else going, thinking, well, yeah, this is just a diversion. The big one is still what we have to prepare for, and they've never really focused on finishing the missions they have at hand. You know, if we believe, at least in America, we believe in a free, independent, entrepreneurial economy, but yet we have only an Obamacare approach or a national health NHS approach for our national security planning and innovation. And over the course of the last 15 years, all that spending, $10 trillion, creates all kinds of bad habits, and it gets layered on and on and on. Now, in 1991, I was in Germany, and that was just after reunification, or at least the wall was down, and there was people could travel east and west. And I was driving down the Autobahn, and a Mercedes S500, like you see there on the right, blew by 150, 160 kilometers an hour. And then an accident just about happened because the Trabant changed lanes in front of them. Now, the Trabant was the national car of East Germany. I thought, wow, what a study in contrast. You have people with the same language, literally from the same country, language, culture, background, different command structure, okay? East Germany built the Trabant. Command planning, the motto was, workers pretended to work, and the government pretended to pay them. And they produced the Trabant, a 40 horsepower, two-stroke engine. Yes, you had to put mixed gasoline like a lawnmower in it, and it sounded like a lawnmower. Versus a Mercedes, 8-cylinder, anti-lock brakes, airbags, air conditioning, and that was in 91. Fantastic car. Which one does government military versus the innovation of the private sector? I'm not just saying private military, but imagine if government decided to build an iPhone. What would it look like and how much would it cost? Why does the private sector need to do some of this? And there's a line. I'm not advocating that the private sector should do all military functions. No. But unless you have a private sector doing pieces of it, you have no price check. One of the big problems is that general officers, policymakers have no idea how something should cost, how much it should cost in maintenance, in people, in longevity, etc. And here's a simple example. VRTREP, vertical replenishment. That is when we would embark, or first of all, the Navy, U.S. Navy would embark their helicopters aboard a big cargo ship and sling load stuff, bundles, bombs, whatever, from supply ship over to the warship. You can do it in heavy seas. You can do it when they're dispersed. It's an essential mission. The Navy wanted to outsource that. We replaced them doing that mission. The Navy used 2 helicopters and 35 people. We did it with 2 helicopters and 8 people. And for every 35 guys that the Navy had deployed, they had another 70 to 100 back in the States, just back from deployment or training or getting ready to deploy. It's very simple to measure apples to apples, who's cheaper on that, okay? Those are my helicopters on the right, Navy helicopter on the left. Same payload, 8 people versus 35. The problem is the Navy admiral that said he needed 35 people to do that mission never had to pay for it. It's just like leaving the water on when you're brushing your teeth. It's very easy to use a free good. Now, what was Blackwater? I never endeavored to be a defense contractor, kind of the accidental tourist. I went to the Naval Academy out of high school. I resigned after a year and a half. I went to a civilian school. I loved the Navy, wanted to be a SEAL. I went back in through officer candidate school, got my commission, went to SEAL training, loved it. It's fantastic, the best job in the world, getting paid to jump out of airplanes, go diving and shoot guns. It was fantastic. And then my wife got cancer, my dad died, all within a few months of each other, and I got out of the Navy earlier than I wanted to sort things out at home. Because my dad had built a very large business, and my mom asked me for some help. So I started Blackwater as a way to stay connected to the SEAL teams. High-end units in the States had been using private facilities since the 70s. Little shooting range here, or a hand-to-hand dojo kind of a place, but no one had done it on an industrial scale. And because of my dad's success and because of my SEAL experience, I was in the usual position that I could fund it. And so at a time of base closings and ranges closing all over the country, because this was peace dividend in America, I built, I guess counterintuitively or stupidly, I built the largest private weapons training facility in the country. Bottom right corner there, it started with 7 ranges on 7,000 acres. And it grew as our government customers said yes. It grew to 55 ranges. We fired around 1.2 to 1.3 million rounds per month. I think that's more than the entire British Army would have fired in a month. We did volume. We had about 1,000 people a day on the ranges, battalion strength. We had 73 aircraft, company-owned aircraft that we deployed in war zones. 3 of our aircraft were shot down in combat. We had about 3,000 people deployed. Now, what kind of work were we doing? We did training, we did security, we did aviation support, and we did construction. Simple programs we did were, well, before I get to that, my dad's business made automotive parts. So he competed in the Ford, GM, and Chrysler against the Europeans, against the Japanese. And so I didn't pay that much attention to his business, but I knew it was competitive. And one of the other things I did when I got out of the SEAL teams is take over his original business he started, which made die-cast machinery. And we had to go through a whole restructuring of that business to make it really lean. And so as you're building out Blackwater, I tried to model the Toyota production system. And because what Blackwater aspired to do was recruit, train, equip, deploy, and support people to do a difficult mission in a difficult place. And so we built a facility to do all that. We had a recruiting database. We kind of had our own social media before there was social media. We had the Blackwater Tactical Weekly, which was a email newsletter that went out. And it built to going out to 200,000 people. And that helped us build a database of 45,000 people, and we could search all their talents. What languages, special military skills, what kind of aircraft they could work on, etc. And then we had in-house psychologists to do the interviews. We could do the criminal background checks through the state and national police. Of course, all the training and the equipping, everything in-house. So we could do that in a very efficient fashion. The military, when they do it, has it spread out over bases across states. I had it within 10 yards of each other. And so it was just like a continuous flow in a Toyota production plant. We could do the same thing. So we started with training and went both directions. Downstream into operational support, back upstream in the recruiting side. So if any of you are studying business, that was a way we tried to squeeze the efficiency out. Another thing I read early on was how to build a lasting business. You can either be in product innovation, right? Build that next iPhone that somebody just has to have. That wasn't us. Squeeze out every bit of waste and the inefficiency so we could be the low-cost bidder? Absolutely. We had fantastic margins. 97, 98% of our revenue was competitively bid. This idea that we were politically connected and getting all these no-bid contracts, that's a flat-out lie. The 2% of the non-competitive bid work is stuff that no one really wanted to do anyway because it was that dangerous. And then third, customer intimacy. You make yourself indispensable to your customers so they can never get rid of you. They don't want to because you're an integral part of that. We aspired to do that. So after I sold Blackwater in 2010, I was asked to give some guidance. At that time, piracy off the coast of Somalia was going crazy. There was 237 ships taken in 2011. Now, at that point, U.S. Navy, NATO, all the rest were doing all kinds of maritime patrols trying to do counter-piracy. If you have a wasp problem in your yard, you don't chase it around with a spray can. You find the nest and you deal with them at the nest. It's pretty easy to find where the pirates are in Somalia because the ship is anchored right off the coast. I mean, you fly along, you don't need a high-dollar satellite, you need a Cessna 172 with a camera. There's the 1,000-foot ship. Because while the ship is anchored, right, a mile offshore, they're waiting to get the ransom paid. And they're waiting 6 months, a year and a half. And while they do that, they have to pay their guards and feed their guards and give them khat. It's that root that they chew. So building a police force, the Somali government asked for help. UAE government funded it. Built a small police force. It was 500 man versus the 22,000 Amazon peacekeepers that were there. That program cost less than what the pirates were taking down in ransom. That program cost less. If any of you saw the movie Captain Phillips, about the SEAL team guys rescuing that Maersk captain off the coast of Somalia, that program cost less than that rescue did. Okay? The cost to the international economy, billions of dollars, $7 to $12 billion in insurance, in fuel diversion, all the rest, not even counting all the ransom. It was cheap. That program went active in June of 2012. No successful pirate attacks that year. 13, 14, 15, 16. Just a month ago, first piracy attack again. It reflared. Because that unit, we weren't involved with that unit past 2012. But that unit still managed to end the piracy issue just a month ago after 4 days, no ransom paid. So again, piracy, that kind of stuff happens because governments lack the means to extend, to project power, in that case, just on their shoreline, let alone out to sea. It was a simple to fix, and more could be done. Now, Afghanistan, which started this war on terror. I was actually involved in Afghanistan in '97 already. I funded Aloya Yurga. Aloya Yurga is a tribal council. We were trying to get the king, Zahir Shah, to return to Afghanistan to make peace and to try to make the Taliban more tolerable. So that was '97. That made a number of contacts that we had, and when 9/11 happened, and of course, the U.S. government needed to get on the ground in Afghanistan and make some things happen, those contacts were very handy for the CIA and others. But now, and you know, the most effective response the U.S. government had to terrorism was that first year. Okay, at the end of that, Al-Qaeda, no kidding, was on their back heel because for 10, 12 years previous, they hit Khobar Towers, they blew up 2 embassies, attack, blew up the USS Cole in Yemen, $1.5 billion warship, no real response. But then, finally, America woke up and the CIA was let off leash, and they were not expecting small special forces teams backed by B-52s. You know, it's important for you to know, as big as the U.S. defense budget was, $550 billion then already, the best options they gave the President of the United States just a few days after 9/11, while their headquarters was still on fire, right? Pentagon was smoking. The best they wanted, the only thing they wanted to do in Afghanistan then was missile strike, bombing, and 1 Ranger raid. They did not dare put troops on the ground before the Afghan winter. It was the CIA, it was the counterterrorism center at the agency that said, authorities, $1 billion, and they'll get it done, Mr. President. And that's what happened. And so for the first year, that worked. For the second year, yes. But the more the conventional military that was prepared to fight what? The Soviet army, with all that equipment, with all those tactics, it slowed down. And it's ground almost to a halt. And so now, the Taliban is winning. Okay, you have Kabul controls just half the country. Lost another 15 to 20% in the last year. And one of the things that's made that happen is a lack of air power. When NATO really stopped and pulled back for their main mission, you went from 130,000 sorties, pounding the Taliban, supporting the Afghan government, down to 7,000. Okay? And that's allowed the Taliban to regroup. Basically, they go back to ancient siege tactics. The same thing. You surround a town and you wait until the guys run out of supplies. And, you know, in Afghanistan, there's maybe 2 or 3 roads that would lead to a base or to a town. And the Taliban mines it, roadside bombs, and they sit and wait. And after a week, after 2 weeks, after a month, that poor Afghan commander makes the deal, makes the bargain that he surrenders and hopefully lives versus all of his men dying ugly. So again, potentially a gap filler a contracted solution. I used to have 26 of our own aircraft in Afghanistan doing that mission for the US military, the biggest air force in the world. The poor Afghans don't have any of that. They can't even respond faster than 7 or 8 hours to their troops in distress. As a ground commander, if you hear your people pleading and screaming for help, for medevac, for close air support is when you drop a bomb or put ordnance on somebody, it is the most disheartening thing you can imagine. And then to hear what happened in Afghanistan this week with 10 Taliban that infiltrated and machine gunned and RPG'd, okay, it's a rocket-propelled grenade, killed guys, Afghan soldiers coming out of a mosque after Friday prayers. They killed 140 or 150 of them. That is disheartening. And I don't think as a country, as Western civilization, we cannot let Afghanistan tip over because if another major terror attack originates from there, A, it's bad politically, and B, I mean, poor Afghanistan, they have been at it for 37, 38 years, since 1979, unending war. And I wish, for the sake of those people, for those tens of millions of Afghans, someone could put that fire out. There's $1 trillion of resources in the ground in Afghanistan. There's $1 trillion plus of oil and gas. But yet, after 15 years of the US government being there, there's not even a mining law in place to attract investors, to attract business, to build mines, and to put people to work. So, instead of the US AID model, okay, that's our part of the State Department that gives foreign aid, I would say we should follow more of an OPIC model, or the British side would be the Commonwealth Development Corporation. I think it's called CDC now. OPIC is the only part of the US government that makes money. You can tell when you go in their offices because they actually have really nice office furniture. But for 39 years, they have been self-sustaining and profitable. Why? They do common sense loans. Yes, it's with political direction. They lend into certain places that are developing and hard, and they go where most banks don't. But they still make money. Why? Because there's private capital that goes in side by side, and the private capital especially is watching the till because it's their money, and they're not going to squander it. The Marriott versus the Serena in Kabul. It's a perfect example of private versus government money. The U.S. Embassy wanted to build a hotel for a safe place to stay. So they spent almost $80 million in Kabul to build a Marriott hotel. 3/4 done, they had to stop construction because the concrete work was so bad it was uninhabitable. So now you have this big eyesore in downtown Kabul, right next to the U.S. Embassy, uninhabitable because of bad management and nobody cared. Versus the Serena, another hotel built by the Aga Khan, spending his own money, investing more than 10 years ago, built a fantastic hotel that's safe and reliable and profitable. So the essential arguments to be addressed in privatization. You have accountability, reliability, and cost. Accountability, done as close to the edge of battle by the country that hired you. If it's the U.S. or the British government, you hold the accountability ideally under the UCMJ or under military law. If it's a military activity, close to the edge of combat so that you have people that understand the realities of what's going on the ground. The reliability, it's a commercial issue. One of my proudest moments professionally, I spoke at the National War College in Washington, and there was a bunch of colonels. That's a fairly senior officer. And one of them came up to me afterwards. He had just been a brigade commander in Baghdad. He had 4,000 men under his command. And he said, I want you to know that on his men's dashboards of their Humvees were the call signs and frequencies for Blackwater, because they knew that if things got bad, the Blackwater guys would come for them. No questions, no bureaucracy, no bullshit. They came. And that was very much the direction we gave the guys. It was Good Samaritan rules. They landed and helped any convoy that was blasted or injured and had medevac requirements. They did all kinds of that stuff way above and beyond the scope of the contract. And cost. I'm very much in favor of activity-based costs, just like a Toyota production vendor would. You know what your activity costs down to the penny, how long it takes someone to do, how much fuel, the tire wear, the engine wear, etc. There is none of that going on in the Pentagon right now, and that's why you spent $10 trillion over the last 15, 16 years. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Great. Thank you very much for that. So we'll start by taking some questions from the floor. So if you would like to ask Mr. Prince a question, please raise your hand and wait for a microphone to reach you. The microphone will not amplify your voice, but it is there for recording purposes. So are there any questions? Yeah, could we go to the gentleman at the end of the row there?
Hi there. Did the Montreux document signed in 2008 alter any of the business practices of Blackwater at all? Or were you already confirming or agreeing to the practices set out in that particular document?
Montreux document?
Yeah.
Help me out.
It was signed in Switzerland, and it was one of those private military contractor best practices.
There was some of the things through the Red Cross.
Yes.
Yeah. So our performance requirements and reporting requirements were already so far above and beyond what those requirements were. So for example, working for the State Department, it was an 1,100-page contract of all the do's and don'ts, down to dress code, even specifying that the vehicles had to be washed. I mean, the vehicles were tracked, the audio was tracked, ammunition was counted. If there was any discharge of a weapon, there was ammunition accountability and debriefing afterwards. The kind of guy, the person we had doing that mission, the requirements were far above and beyond what any Montreux document or any other NGO had recommended. So in our case, they had to have at least 8 years of military experience with perfect conduct, obviously no domestic violence, no dings on their criminal record, extensive psychological background and testing, hundreds of hours of additional training on top of it, including judgment training in shoot, no shoot scenarios. So yes, I am familiar with that now, but we were already performing way above and beyond what that was asking for.
Next question, please. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, I'd be interested to just hear about your experience in the UAE and Abu Dhabi.
Okay.
I understand you've had some dealings there as well, is that correct? Or not?
One of the reasons I moved there was to deal with the piracy issue. And if y'all want to learn more about that, knowing it would be controversial, we sent a film crew along, and they actually filmed it. It's called The Somalia Project. It's on iTunes. And there's a part in that movie that makes me extremely proud, because there was a group of guys that had been held, I think, for 1.5 years or 2 years, held hostage, beaten severely, some of them murdered. And the quote from that guy, he said, "And then we heard shooting. We heard a lot of shooting. And then we heard a helicopter. And we were elated because we knew someone was coming to rescue us." And it was finally resolved. He said, "We prayed to God, and he finally sent someone to rescue us." And he sent the PMPF. And I thought, you know what? We can be vilified. We can be called all kinds of names. But the fact is, I think there's 26 guys that walked free that nobody cared about except us. And I would encourage you to watch it, especially as piracy reflares. It's not a ideological thing. It's just a business for them. And it's a business that they will do as long as there's open space for them to operate in. In the back?
Hi, thanks. So I was based in Zayed Military City in 2013. And judging from the noises coming from up the road, the guys there weren't being trained to deliver groceries or provide medevac solutions. So I was just wondering to what degree you're involved in aiding the Emiratis with current operations in Yemen?
Not at all. Zero.
To refocus on your talk, let's go back to that a bit. You spoke a lot about the need for deepening private sector involvement in some of these critical operations. Do you think the trust is there for a more deepening interaction with the private sector? You write in your book that you felt your men were betrayed by the US government. The US government and federal courts have held your employees accountable and responsible for different issues. Is the trust there to expand the interaction between the public and private sector?
Well, I would say that nature hates a vacuum. And conflict resolution is a very difficult, very dangerous business. Civilians are dying from famine, from drought, from food insecurity because they can't plant, because they can't stay on their property. I don't see, having spent $10 trillion, tens of thousands of casualties, and thousands of dead Americans or Brits, that the U.S. is going to go charging into other failed states of that 8.5% of the world's population. So who's going to do it? And it is like I said, it is a difficult job. And if someone has a better idea, I'd be happy to debate them anytime, anywhere. Because nation-state militaries are very expensive and they're very, very politically constrained, because politicians are afraid to take casualties. And so that means instead of going out and patrolling and doing the equivalent of community policing, you drive around in a huge armored vehicle waiting for someone to ambush you. And that's why the U.S. effort in Afghanistan has failed, and that's why it nearly failed in Iraq. I mean, sadly, Iraq was pacified when U.S. forces were unwisely completely withdrawn in 2011. We literally snatched defeat from the jaws of victory.
So the political will might not be there for a massive army military deployment.
That's
Is
right.
the political will there to hand this over to the private sector, do you think?
In some cases, it may be the easy button, because it's the only button they can hit. Because you can either do nothing, or you can send thousands, because government can't send hundreds, they always send thousands. The footprint gets large, the cost gets large, and the private sector can fill that gap. So in 2005, we were asked to build a maritime unit for Azerbaijan. It was funded by the US government. And the situation we entered was very hostile because the Azeris were so upset because all this stuff had been promised by the US and nothing was delivered on. And so we sent 4 people there. They lived out in town in an apartment, and they built a maritime unit so they could protect this offshore gas which was being produced in the Caspian Sea. And at the same time, so our guys rebuilt their training area, ranges, docks, boats, taught them how to swim, took them from no capability to doing underway shipboarding in 10 months. Did all that with 4 guys. The Navy, US Navy, was supposed to come and build a barracks for this unit. And in the entire time we were there, they were still debating where to put the temporary camp for the 150 Navy sailors because of the political sensitivity of being on the northern border of Iran. So that is a clear example of a small, simple private sector solution where big government could not get it done.
So I'm kind of curious where you draw the line with regards to things like accountability, because I'm kind of curious as to, like, with the Nassau massacre, whereas like there isn't an exact line of saying whose fault it is versus like where if it were the convoy were defended by the U.S. government, you can say clearly the U.S. government messed up and killed people. So where do you think the line is with like a private sector, like effectively military operation compared to an actual state-run military?
Well, whether it's a police shooting, an active duty military shooting in a crisis, stressful situation. So in 2014, maybe it's either the fall of 13 or 14, there was a similar incident that happened in Washington, D.C. that you never heard about. There was a woman driving her car who got into a traffic altercation, and federal police officers opened fire on her. She fled the scene, went to another federal building, more altercation, more shooting. Finally, the third altercation, where the federal police gunned her down and killed her, and they found that she was not carrying any guns or weapons, solely her baby in a car seat in the back of her car. You never really heard about that in the news. I think that news cycle died in about a day and a half. There was no car bombs in Washington the previous week, or the previous month, or the previous year. I cannot imagine the hue and cry if a contractor had taken that shot instead of the hundreds of shots taken by a federal police officer. So people can say, contractor's bad, trigger happy. I would disagree with that. In our case, we were using proven U.S. military veterans. Okay, we have an all volunteer force. They volunteered once to serve in active duty. Now they're back serving again. And to hold them, I'd say all a contractor would ask for is equal justice under the law, that you treat them the same for split-second decisions made under duress, that if they get it wrong, they get vaporized. Okay, a 500-pound car bomb vaporizes you. It doesn't matter how armored your vehicle is. And those, we had that happen to our guys as well, where they were vaporized in a Suburban. So those are the difficult things about fighting people that hide behind civilians, that use children and women as human shields, and that actively will commit suicide to kill you and as many of your people as possible. It is a difficult, dangerous, and dirty business. And the substitute is, the opposite is to do nothing. And so that's, that is the hard thing. I guess you'll never really figure out exactly how to do that. But I would say from experience that doing it with a uniform code of military justice as close to the forward edge of battle as possible makes more sense from an accountability and justice perspective than 7,000 miles away in a fortunately very peaceful capital.
So even if you bring the UCMJ into use for contractors, this vilification of contractors you've spoken about, do top military veterans want to work for a contractor now? Do they not think if it goes wrong they're going to be held or vilified to far greater degree than somebody who is in uniform?
There are people that join the military because they want to get their college paid for. There are people that join the military because they're good at certain skills. And there are a lot of contractors that are good at being soldiers. And they're good at patrolling, or they're good at training, or they're good aviators. And so there's a lot of people, there's an enormous amount of talent that is available. As we went from a training center to doing security and all the other stuff that we did, we built upon a lot of skills that were sitting there latent in the private sector. When you take a 25-year SEAL who's jumped out of an airplane 1,000 times, he spent hundreds of hours underwater diving, and has fired hundreds of thousands of rounds through a handgun or a weapon, and spent months in weird places patrolling and doing difficult things. And now he retires. And now he becomes a mailman. That is probably not his highest and best skills. And so putting him back to work on a work schedule that he controls, kind of like a roughneck going out to an oil rig for 60 or 90 days, and they do it, and they get paid well for it, and then when they leave, their pay goes to zero. That model works for the taxpayer because it's cheaper. That model works for the government as well because you're getting a fantastic skill that is focused on the mission at hand that they can turn on and off without a huge legacy insurance costs and legacy retirement costs beyond what they've already spent. Sir, in the aisle.
Government officials generally tend to interact with private military companies. So you could see this happening after the Iraq War when there were high-level government officials in the cabinet there's supposed evidence that correlates that to increase in profits of companies like Halliburton. And therefore...
Okay, let me answer that. People love to beat up on Halliburton, and that's too bad, because Halliburton is an amazing company that didn't need the government work. Believe me, they're a fantastic oil field services company, and they make way more money and take a lot less grief for doing that. They answered the call when their country needed help as well. When you try to move 400,000 troops from Kuwait up into Iraq and then support them, that takes a serious logistics footprint. the issue of margin and politics. Let's talk about the F-35. Okay, believe me, service contracting and private military contractors is not where your spending and waste is. When you build the F-35, the most expensive weapon system in human history, and you have to build it in 45 out of the 50 states to make it politically unassailable, you got a problem. Okay, when you have an aircraft, it's called the F-35 Lightning II, and you can't fly it within 35 miles of a thunderstorm, you got a problem. Okay? You have a $140 million airplane that doesn't perform, that gets smoked in air-to-air combat by a 30-year-old F-16 carrying twin fuel tanks. You got a problem. PMCs are not your problem. That is.
Right, at the end of that row there on the, yeah, just you there.
Good evening. I have a remark and a question. The question refers to USAID that you've mentioned, and I was wondering... USAID, USSID.
USAID, okay.
Yes. And my question is whether you could elaborate on the relevance of USAID in this wider context. The remark being that aid, foreign aid, unlike humanitarian aid, is a preventive measure to war, I would see it as such. And that, as you know, the trend in aid goes towards private-public partnerships in implementing foreign aid projects. So that should actually appeal to your theory that it's more efficient, unlike being implemented by the state. So could you maybe explain on why you mentioned USAID in this context?
Because I see an enormous amount of waste and sometimes negative effects caused by USAID. When you are giving away huge quantities of free food and you destroy the marketplace so that the poor farmers who are out there, so for example, agriculture in the United States average 16 tons per hectare yield, okay? Brazil, about 6 tons, in Africa, 2 tons. So the African farmer that is trying to grow, trying to compete, not just feed his family, but have a little bit extra to sell in the market so he can actually make some money and get ahead. When he is competing with free food that is being given away, and in many cases wasted or sold by corrupt secondary and tertiary officials, it destroys marketplaces. I would rather see USAID, if they're going to spend money, at least build infrastructure. It's $500 million a year or so that is spent by USAID in South Sudan. The only really useful, well, I won't say that. One very useful thing I've seen USAID do is actually build a road from the Uganda border crossing all the way to the capital of Juba. They paved the road, huge increase in trade and lowering logistics costs, because people that are clinging to the edge of survival, lowering their logistics costs gets them food and water and healthcare and all those things cheaper, better, and faster. I would rather have them, in giving money through an NGO is not investing, that's spending. It's a very different approach if you invest and you expect a return on that asset going forward. I would rather see the OPIC or the CDC model where money is spent with private money spent as well that is put at risk to get a return on something going forward, so you have a lasting return from a power plant, a toll road, a bridge, a water purification plant, or whatever that might be. That's how you build economy. One thing I've seen, because I travel around Africa and the developing world a lot, is the Chinese have done a lot of resource development, a lot of mining, a lot of oil development, and they build a lot of roads, and it matters. And nothing, I have seen that improve more Africans' lives than almost anything. When you put a bypass road around Nairobi, so people aren't spending 6 and 7 hours a day in traffic. When you repave all the roads of Kinshasa or roads leading away from the capital, it has a huge effect on people's lives. And I wish we would shift away a bit from the aid cycle of transfer payments and at least put infrastructure in the ground for places where it has some lasting value, because it will develop trade for those for the locals that live there.
So looking forward, you've been outspoken in your criticism before of the DoD, of the State Department, of the CIA. Do you think change is coming to the Pentagon, to Foggy Bottom in the Trump administration?
So.
Right, great. Well, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Mr. Prince for coming.